me always is Fitz. Fitz, how are you?
I'm still digesting some turkey from last week, Ray, but I'm doing well. A belated happy Thanksgiving to you and our guest.
Absolutely. Well, today we'd like to welcome Pamela Frasch to the Cold Red Podcast. Pamela is a professor of law at the Lewis and Clark Law School and an adjunct professor at NYU Law. In 2008, she founded the Center for Animal Law Studies and wrote several books on animal laws and rights. Pamela, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure having you on today.
Thank you. I'm so delighted to be here and a belated happy Thanksgiving to both of you.
Thank you very much.
We appreciate that, Pamela. You and I go way back, don't we?
Oh my gosh, we do. Just before we started recording, Ray was asking if I knew I said, "Do I know him?" We go way back. And I can't remember what years were we running around the country doing those trainings. Do you remember the years?
It was definitely late 90s.
Yeah.
I think pre 9/11,
Hmm.
because our mission kind of changed and we weren't as, if the FBI is free to do certain things. But yeah,
Hmm.
I'm not sure exactly how we met or who introduced us, but I'm a relatively new profiler, just done, with Unabom, working some other cases. But through our teaching, and Ray knows this, I think we discussed a little bit of this last week um, with our friends on Mind Over Murder podcast, the homicidal triad that John Douglas and Bob Ressler and those, the early, or actually the first profilers, a lot of their research of serial killers, they had three common denominators: um, bedwetting, fire setting, and
Hmm.
yes, animal cruelty.
Hmm.
And it was actually a predictor for future violent behavior. And Pam, you were already involved in teaching. You were already a lawyer. You're helping prosecutors' offices around the country at that time.
Hmm.
And I think you're then with the Animal Legal Defense Fund, right?
That's right. So I'd been in private practice early in my law career doing labor and employment law of all things, if you can imagine, but animal law didn't really exist at that time. So I started doing some pro bono work for different shelters, and I discovered this organization called the Animal Legal Defense Fund, which was at that time a relatively new organization. And it was this group of lawyers who just cared about animal protection, animal rights, animal welfare, animal cruelty. And I thought, wow, these are my people. And I ended up doing some pro bono work for them. And in that process, I started getting a lot of calls from prosecutors all over the country who were trying to prosecute animal abusers, but they had no idea how to do it. They weren't familiar with the laws. They didn't have resources. They didn't have expert witnesses. And so I would assist them as best I could. And from that, I then was hired full time by ALDF to start the criminal justice program, whose mission it was to work with prosecutors and other in the law enforcement community to help investigate and prosecute animal abusers. And of course, one of the things that we saw early on was this link between animal abuse and human violence. And I think actually, Jim, it was through Randy Lockwood, who was with the Humane Society of the United States, who was focusing on that link. I think you had been doing some work with them, and I think he may have introduced us to begin with. And what was so wonderful about that was that you and I teamed up and we went around the country to a lot of different jurisdictions to train police officers about animal cruelty laws and how to prosecute them and just how you do an investigation of an animal cruelty case. And I was saying to Ray earlier, it was great doing this with you because when the FBI walks in and says, do X, Y, and Z, everybody sits up and listens. If I had just gone on my own, even though I know this stuff, and I'd be like, who are you? And why are you here? You're with a nonprofit. So it was a wonderfully powerful experience for me. And I think made such a difference because we started seeing police officers really then understand it was not their fault. They weren't at that time getting the training that they do today on animal cruelty. Um, so I think it really did a lot of good, and it was a lot of fun to be able to do that with you.
Yeah, and Ray, you knew the bosses back in the behavioral analysis
Hmm.
unit back then, Bill Hagmeyer, Steve Etter, Larry Ankrum. I kind of ran this scenario by them. Hey, I said, I met this person. She's pretty sharp. and she's looking for she's teaching prosecutors and police anti cruelty towards animal, and certainly how once a case is made, how to prosecute them. And they said, well, Jim, I mean, we don't really have any statutes on the book. I guess there was some kind of federal interstate issues with animal cruelty, whatever. But we have other things that go on. I said, yeah, but how about if we look at the nexus of let's me go out with her and do some of this training. And at some point you came to Quantico, and I think you met
Mhm.
my unit chief and some others,
Yeah.
and they were, as with everybody, were impressed with you. And I said, let's go out of a team effort, and she can kind of focus on, meaning you, Pamela,
Mhm.
the animal cruelty issues itself and how serious they are, but so we can kind of cover our bases, budgetary wise and all that. I'll be talking about the link between early animal cruelty or even later animal cruelty in
Mhm.
someone's developmental stages, and how it can also lead to, of course, human cruelty,
Mhm.
domestic violence, murder, serial
Mhm.
killers, things like that. And once they heard that and met you, they said, you know what, that sounds fine. And then we picked and choose a couple different venues. I definitely came out to your way in Oregon one
Mhm.
time. We met in New York another time, New York
Mhm.
City, and we also you were in Quantico, and I think you addressed some of my folks in the profiling unit back then too, and
Yeah.
we kind of did our joint presentation. So that's how it all sort of morphed. I'm not a lawyer. I wasn't out there training prosecutors per se, but I was trying to establish that link that basically police officers, if you have a kid in your neighborhood or in your jurisdiction, and that kid's abusing animals, or the other way around, you're finding
Mhm.
dead animals. I hate to be graphic here, but they're tortured,
Mhm.
disembodied. I mean, all these types of things. And Pam knows all these cases. I said,
Mhm.
that's an investigation. I know it's air quotes here, only an animal, sometimes a squirrel or a stray
Mhm.
cat, but there's other things going on in this person's head.
Mhm.
And this person, if they're not already abusing adults, they're going to someday, or children. And
Mhm.
and we got to get these things. We have got to have a record system, and that's kind of the team approach that we took. And certainly for you're about 3 or 4 years there, I think we were pretty good in getting that message out.
Yeah, that's right. And it's so interesting too, because I did think that a really effective way of communicating that not everybody cares about animals. I think everybody should care about animals because they feel pain and they're part of our lives and we should care about them, but not everybody does. But one thing that was really effective, I thought, was emphasizing you don't even need to care about animals. If you care about violence in your community, if you care about reducing crime rates overall, this is another tool in your toolbox. This is something that you can use to your advantage to be able to get somebody into the system who's already done this thing. And as you said, is likely to or already has done, because some studies show that people who abuse animals are just as likely to have already been antisocial or just violent and engaging in difficult behavior with humans prior to the animal abuse as they are after the animal abuse. And so let's just get them into the system because they're doing some bad things. And especially when you see like you said, when you see kids engaging in that activity, something's going on.
You know, Pam, there's a lot of surprising and challenging aspects of working in animal law. But
Mhm.
the big thing here is that a lot of our listeners are even unfamiliar with that term.
Mm.
So if you could define it in layman's terms so that
Mhm.
they have an understanding of what you actually do and how it ties in to what the FBI was looking at when we talk about violence.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I can't tell you the number of times when people ask me, what do you do? I'm a law professor. Oh, what do you teach? Animal law. Animal law? What's that? I mean, so it is this term that most people are not familiar with. So animal law is really that area of focus in which the interests of animals, meaning if an animal is interested in not being harmed, in perhaps being able to live without suffering, then we look at the laws and the statutes and the cases that involve those types of matters. So we're really looking at the interests of animals. And so let me give you an example of something that is not an animal law case and one that is involving basically the same facts. Let's say that you have a racehorse and you want to ship the racehorse to Sarasota for a race. You contract with the company that's going to ship the horse. They ship the horse is fine, but the horse arrives late, misses the race. The owner is upset. They sue for breach of contract because they potentially lost some money. The carrier did not fulfill their contract. That is not an animal law case. The horse is fine. It's just a straight up, but even though it involves a horse, it's not an animal law case. Now, same scenario, but the racehorse gets injured in transit, arrives, the horse is injured and is unable to race. Now it's an animal law case because the horse has been injured. The horse has an interest in not being injured, and of course the owner of the horse has an interest in that horse not being injured. But now we're talking about the well-being of the horse as opposed to just a contractual obligation that was not fulfilled. So you really have to look at, just because a case involves an animal, it's not necessarily animal law. Has the animal been harmed somehow? Has something happened to that animal that has had a negative impact? Then we're talking about an animal law case. And of course, the classic examples are the types of cases that Jim and I looked at. Somebody who beat up and shot their dog, or somebody who was putting out poison for all of the neighborhood cats, or the kids who steal the neighborhood cat and do some ritualistic sacrifice of that cat in the woods, or somebody who intentionally starves their horses out in the field. I mean, so you see those types of cases everywhere all the time, involving all different types of animals, and they're pretty. Unfortunately, they're very common, and people are starting to think a little bit differently about animal abuse, particularly as it applies to companion animals, so dogs and cats in particular, but even other types of animals as well. So we're starting to see some differences. And the anti-cruelty laws have strengthened since the time that Jim and I were working. And I think in large part because there was so much work going on by people like Jim and others to try to raise awareness about
and
that.
you, Pamela.
So we were all working together. But it's really, that's what we're talking about. If an animal's been harmed or is in imminent risk of being harmed, then it becomes an animal law case.
Is there a particular species or area of law that's currently a hot topic right now?
Yeah, that's another really great question. So right now, what we're seeing, a lot of people are interested in the animals that we eat, so farmed animals, and principally because so many of the land. So there's aquaculture, of course, and then you've got terrestrial animals, and both are being farmed really intensively, and the conditions are not great. So a lot of people are getting into this field because they're concerned about that, and they want to improve the conditions for the animals that are on the farms. And perennially, you have people interested in companion animals. I mean, just, all the studies show that we think about our companion animals as members of our family. And so people care very deeply about that. So we constantly see a lot of interest in that. But I would say that the biggest increase in interest over the last several years that I've seen with students and with advocates and people practicing in the field, it's really farmed animals.
And I gather it's, I mean, there's an issue whether being a vegetarian or not, eating meat or not. I don't think that's the issue here, but if the animals are ultimately going to be rendered and sold for their meat, quite frankly, it seems like some of these laws and some of these issues are more about how the animals are treated while they're in fact in captivity and being raised, what they're being fed, what they're being injected, and their living conditions, of course. I assume that's what we're talking about here.
Yeah, that's what we're talking. I mean, if you talk about, worldwide, I think the percentages of people who identify as vegan or vegetarian is like 4% or 6%. It's a very small percentage of people that identify that way. So the vast, vast majority of people do eat animals. And a lot of people want to feel better about their choices, and if they can feel confident that the animal was raised in a way that was not intentionally harmful, or that was in a situation where there's less harm, they're going to feel better about that. And so a lot of people are working on welfare reforms within the farmed animal world. Other people are looking at, we should just stop eating animals completely, and we shouldn't have animals in those environments. But a lot of people are working on the welfare reforms.
I remember in our earliest days hanging out, whether we'd go for lunch or breakfast or something, and I learned a lot from Pamela. And to this day, I only buy eggs that are not, from cage chickens, but free range. But I said, why don't you eat eggs? At least back then you didn't. And you said, well, because of how they're kept in captivity. And I respected that. And you showed me some things. I watched videos over the years. And yeah, I won't mention any companies, but in Maryland, sometimes driving to the different parts of the state, they have these large processing plants. And I just know what it's like inside there. So I only buy, if I'm going to buy eggs, it's going to be, from free range. And I know there's even people even abuse that term, what that really means. There's a guy near where I live and that he has his own little farm, and we buy the eggs from him. It's like $5 a dozen, but you know what? I just feel better doing it, and I really owe those early days to you. And no, I am not a vegetarian. I do eat meat, and I do like it cooked as opposed to Ray, who prefers it uncooked. Um,
There used to be
go.
some rumors about that, Jim, in my younger days where I ate raw meat, but that was on the football field. And that was not. That
But
was
the
not at the
animals
dinner table.
were always treated humanely beforehand, correct?
Well,
Yeah.
they say, Jim,
Yeah, what
But
happens in husbandry stays in the husbandry.
exactly. But let me ask you this, Pamela. In
Yes.
your opinion,
Mm.
what would you say is the most misunderstood aspect of animal rights and protections?
Mm.
And
I
and
think,
don't limit yourself to the
mhm,
United States.
yeah.
Look at it internationally. I mean, I know there's some things in other countries, elephants, rhinoceroses, and other
hmm
game that's in these other
hmm
countries. And I know you've done some things internationally as well.
hmm
So
hmm
so don't limit yourself just to here.
Yeah. I think one of the most misunderstood issues is that many people think that if you're interested in animal protection, you're an animal rights person over here to whom you cannot have any kind of a reasonable conversation. And if you eat meat, if you go hunting and you have a farm, that there are people on the other side who are like, I can't talk to that person. I mean, I think we demonize, both sides demonize each other. And I think in my many years of doing this and talking with a lot of people, and also coming from a family with a lot of farmers and ranchers, I think it's just not true. I think there are more things that unite us and that we can care about together than what separates us. But of course, it's always the edges that get all of the attention, right? But, a very crass example that I use sometimes is not that it doesn't matter who you are. We can all agree we should not be microwaving cats, which is a case I worked on.
Oh,
We can all agree that we should not be doing that, right?
right.
And I bet there are other things that we can all agree on. And so I think that's something that's very misunderstood, that there's no common ground, and there is a lot of common ground. And I also think that it's interesting because a lot of words get um, used, animal welfare, animal rights, animal protection, animal law. And sometimes we all have very different definitions of what those terms mean. And again, I think sometimes we are more in concert than we are apart. So that's something that I would love for us to be having more dialogue with people who don't necessarily, or that we think don't necessarily agree with everything that we might be working toward. And because I think we would all be surprised by how much we all really care. And I remember, I mean, here's like a great example. So one of the very early cases that I worked on when I was still doing pro bono work for ALDF involved this terrible hoarding case. And I'm sure your listeners know what hoarders are, but in case they don't, it's, somebody who has 100, 200, 300, 1,000 animals that they keep in their house, and obviously nobody is equipped to care for all of them, and they fall into a state of extreme neglect. And sometimes, in my view, those are the cruelest cases because it can go on for weeks and months and years without it even being discovered, and those animals are suffering in the meantime. And so there was a woman named Vicki Kittles. She had 115 dogs, some cats, and a couple of chickens on a school bus. And she had done this. She was a classic hoarder, and she'd done this in several different jurisdictions. They kept just basically buying her off, and she would go into different jurisdictions. And then she came into Oregon. And there was a prosecutor named Josh Marquis who said, the buck stops here. So he prosecuted her, was able to successfully prosecute her. We worked with him a lot, which was great. But there were several issues that arose as a result of that. Number one, at that time, very few states had a felony level anti-cruelty law, including Oregon. Number two, she was able to manipulate the system because the animals who are property under the law were viewed as evidence. And so she was able to successfully petition the court to disallow any medical treatment for the dogs when they were being held. And a number of them died. They had heartworm. They had terrible things. And there were a few other things that arose. And from that, then we said, okay, we need to change that. So I drafted a law to provide for all of those things. The Oregon's first felony anti-cruelty law, being able to give animals medical care, and a number of other things. And so then we went to go lobby the legislature. And Charles Turner, who was the former U.S. attorney for the state of Oregon, and he was the one who had had his life threatened by the Bhagwan Rajneeshi. Do you remember that whole weird thing in Oregon?
Mhm.
There was this
Yes.
cult, and he had death threats and all sorts of other things. Very conservative Republican, but by God, he loved his dogs and he loved animals. And we were able to get him to join us to lobby the legislature. And he was so fabulous and so wonderful. And again, he walked, and you would never, if you just read his profile, he'd be the last person on earth that you think, or that some people would think, oh yeah, he'll be really supportive of this law. But he was in it to win it. And we were able to get it passed in one session. But it was such a great example of, look beyond just your own community. There are so many people with lots of different political beliefs and different backgrounds and different professions and everything else who care about these issues, and you can form a really powerful coalition.
Wow. You brought up some terms, and you used something earlier. Is the term companion animal now more of a substitute for pet?
Well, that might just be in my work. It is in the legal academy and within people who are working on these things full time. I think generally pet is still probably the preferred term, but I'm just so used to saying companion animal. But it's the same thing, So
Well,
yeah.
I'm a linguist, and those terms always interest me as they morph through the legal system, through our culture. And how about do people own pets? Are they property? What are some of the state by state definitions that are applied to pets or companion animals?
Yeah. So animals are property in every jurisdiction. So animals are property. Now, it's interesting because generally you think, well, property can't have rights. Animals don't have rights. But I would argue, and people have actually argued this for a long time, that our anti-cruelty laws are a form of a right for an animal in sort of the broadest sense of that word. For example, a table is a piece of property. I could take an axe and crush that table. But if my dog is a piece of property, if I took an axe and crushed my dog, that would be a felony charge in most jurisdictions at this point. So animals are property everywhere. And I'm sorry, what was the second part of what you asked?
Um, I think that was two parts of it, just companion animals versus pet, and are they in fact property, and how it goes state by state, or is there a federal statute that defines that more clearly?
Yeah, there's not really a federal statute that defines that more clearly. Everything is state by state. There are some federal laws. Service dogs are defined under the ADA, but generally, state by state, some jurisdictions say companion animals, and then they define them. It's not so much the words they use as how they define the words. So if they use pet or companion animal, what does that mean? And it's different in every single state. In some states, companion animal means a dog and a cat. In others, it means any fish, any invertebrate, any this, any that, dogs and cats, horses, everything. So it kind of depends on which jurisdiction you're in. Some smaller jurisdictions like San Francisco have passed, they're mainly just symbolic kinds of ordinances that say you are no longer an owner of your pet, you are the guardian of that pet. And it's just sort of a nice Like I said, it's symbolic. It doesn't change anything in terms of your responsibilities, which are set out under state law. But I think it's just some effort to recognize that there is a special bond between your pet and your family.
Then we have service animals,
Hmm.
and we have is it emotional animals? What we call people who
Yeah,
depend on
emotional
them for.
support. Yeah,
There you go.
emotional support animals. Yeah, ESAs. And so ESAs are not defined under federal law. And there, um, it used to be that emotional support animals were given a lot. You were given a lot of leeway to bring what you would define as an emotional support animal onto a plane, into a building, everything else. Unfortunately, a lot of people took advantage of that and started bringing things like peacocks and other things on, other types of animals onto a plane. And the airlines went, nope, we're out, we're done. So then they changed their regulations, which they had the right to do. And a lot of establishments, same thing. And even in when you rent an apartment, generally speaking, the landlord cannot deny you your service animal as defined under the ADA, but they can just say, no, it has to be a service animal, not just an ESA, not just because the dog helps you feel less anxious. Dogs make all of us feel less anxious. There's a higher threshold. So ESAs, they've, I mean, they're still out there and people rely on them. And I think it's a real support for a lot of people, but they don't have nearly the protection or status legally or otherwise as a service animal under the ADA.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of us have favorite animals. My favorite animal is a dog.
Mhm.
I've always had dogs since I can remember. I've always
Yeah.
had a dog when I grew up, and I have my own. How about you? Do you have a favorite animal?
See, Ray, you're a man after my heart because I too am a dog person. My favorite animal absolutely is a dog. And yeah, dogs are great. I mean, I don't want any animal to suffer, but give me a nice dog.
Yeah.
It's a they're I- Sometimes I think that we don't deserve dogs. They're such great animals and they're such wonderful companions. Jim, what about you? Do you have a favorite animal?
Dog, if I'm going to have one, and we had a cat visiting last week here.
Hmm.
First time a cat in this house. I have two grand dogs now. Um,
Nice.
Three granddaughters, another granddaughter on the way, and two grand
Oh,
dogs. So,
that's great.
Buddy and Charlie, if you're out there and you're listening, we know you like to watch and listen to Cold Red. We're talking
Betty and
about you right
Charlie.
now. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
um, but they like to dance together sometimes. We tell our grandkids because they're kind of young, and oh, look how Buddy likes to dance with Charlie. Yeah, they're not exactly dancing, even though they're both fixed. I can't quite understand that, but yeah. So I don't have a
Mhm.
pet right now or a companion animal. My one of my favorite news sources is the Babylon Bee, and they said there's some people out there who their emotional support animals need their own emotional support animals. So
That's
they're
probably true.
tasked so heavily with the human with which they're dealing that
Yeah.
those poor creatures need some help too. But
Yeah.
that's an amazing story. I like to we share a number of anecdotes together.
Mhm.
One of them is remember when you invited me to Lewis and Clark, the law school, and we
Yes.
don't have to say names, but so
Come
and I
on.
think to clarify
You
things
already
here,
did, Jim. You mentioned Lewis and Clark.
well, all right, they're
Come
I
on.
don't think they're around to complain,
All right.
and
Well,
they had
that's
nothing to
good.
do with it.
That's good.
But um,
Oh
but
my goodness.
but Pamela made it very clear that she's a very reasoned person and takes the science and the law very seriously and how animals are treated and the environment and issues related to that. There's PETA,
Hmm.
what's it, ethical treatment towards animals.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
they go a little bit, where they put the women in cages or have them not wear anything at all, and and they have their protests. They do their things,
Mhm.
but that wasn't Pamela, and at
Mm-mm.
least I never saw you in a cage,
No, no, no,
and
that's
you
no, not my,
and you wouldn't
no, no.
wear a fur coat, and but so anyway, I came to your, and there are some people though that are on the radical side, and we'll leave it that description there. But yeah, I was in one of your classrooms, and it was a prearranged talk. I think your students knew the FBI agent profiler guy, Jim Fitzgerald, would be in the class that night. And why don't you kind of take it from there?
Yeah. So here's a little bit of background. So Jim and I were out doing our trainings, and we came to back to Portland, and I knew that one of our training was going to overlap with my class, and so I asked a guest speaker to come and speak the class. Little did I know that the guest speaker then asked a different guest speaker to come in
That's
and
right.
speak, and did not talk to me and did not get it approved by me. And so the class was ongoing, and the speaker of the speaker, the guest speaker of the guest speaker, was speaking. And Jim and I walk in, and this was a person who was very well known to the FBI and very well known to me because of, had been on in all of the news and just engaging in all sorts of behavior that I would not engage in. And we walked in, and I remember it was really interesting because of course everybody knew that Jim was with the FBI, and the speaker that I had asked knew that he had not gotten my permission to bring this other person in. And so we walked in, and just it's like slowly I turned, everybody just turned. And it was really, it was kind of a crazy experience, particularly because I think that this individual had recently been like on the cover of the New York Times magazine, and I mean, it was because of the activities that he'd be engaging in, which were highly illegal. And anyway, so that was not, it was interesting.
Yeah, we never
How
had
can
any
you how
words
can
or
you guys
anything.
not mention his name? How can you do that? Who was it? Jeffrey Epstein? Come on.
Oh God, no.
I mean,
Oh no, no. Thank
no.
goodness. No, no, no.
Maybe he hung up his spikes, or let's just say this guy was associated with people who would spike trees. So this guy was kind of all over the place and certainly burned down construction equipment. I think he was very much against, lumber, the lumber industry, whatever.
Mhm.
And there's right ways of being against things and wrong ways, in my opinion. And yeah, and I think we had a couple, glares at each other, but he didn't say anything to me, or I just gave my presentation afterwards, and no problems in that regard. I think poor Pamela felt more uncomfortable. I can handle these guys. These guys don't frighten
Yeah.
me, or he's not going to spike me, that's for sure. And
No, it just, I mean,
he,
I think the thing that was so discomforting to me was that it was my class, and I
Yeah,
felt
yeah.
like, he should, the speaker I had asked to fill in for me should have run that by me first, and then to be sort of blindsided by that. And particularly because with my law students, I always say to them, um, you know, you are going to be in the rare position of having a license to be able to do things that most people cannot do. You can go into court, you can represent people, you can represent the activists, you can do all of these things. You can't do any of that if you are behind bars. You can't do that if you are engaging in this activity yourself. So think about, if you really care about these issues, think about how you can add the most value. And also, as an officer of a court, and not everybody who's a lawyer agrees with me on this, and that's fine. But as an officer of the court, I am loath to intentionally break the law with any kind of violence, or anything like that. I just can't even imagine doing that. And I talk about that with my students. And of course, everybody's going to make their own decisions about these things. And like I said, not all lawyers agree with me. Some are very, very activist oriented. Um, but I believe that as a lawyer, I have some tools at my disposal that can be more useful if I'm not behind bars. So I just draw that line. And so, given that, and then having somebody in my classroom who was talking and really promoting a very different perspective. I mean, that's fine. It's good to have different perspectives presented, but I would have liked some heads up and the opportunity to approve it, and which I was not given.
Well, let me ask you this.
Mm-hmm.
You're a lawyer in the field
Mm-hmm.
of animal law,
Mm-hmm.
and if you could pass one law tomorrow that would benefit animals everywhere,
Mm-hmm.
what would it be?
Oh, so many things that need to be. You know what I would love to have? I would love for Congress to create a Department of Animal Welfare. Because right now, everything is so scattered into different departments, statewide, federal, just different jurisdictions. And to have people who actually know something about animals in position in leadership positions within that new department, I think that would be really, really, really effective. You know, have veterinarians, have people who know something about the science, people who understand the laws, somebody who gets how all of these things work together. And then that way it wouldn't be such this patchwork quilt of different laws that sometimes are in conflict with each other, because they're different departments, different things happening. So I would love that to happen.
Hmm.
Ray, let's talk to some of our people and see what we can do.
Yeah. Wouldn't that be
Why
great?
not? Why not? I
Congress
mean, I
people
think
out
that's a
there, if
great
you're
idea.
listening,
Yeah.
That's a great idea. I love that idea. I really do.
it could
But
also
Yeah. It's
cover agriculture and farm animals as
oh,
well as
yeah.
absolutely,
companion
absolutely,
Yeah.
yeah.
animals. And
Yeah.
yeah,
It would do. I mean,
uh,
all the USDA stuff that's currently dealing with all the farms, bring it under that department.
It
yeah,
could fall under the Department of Agriculture. It really could. I
Yeah, it
agree.
could. It could be its own division under that. And just, I
Yeah.
mean, and there are some divisions right now that, I mean, but I would want something that has authority to be able to make its own regulations and to be able to, or to propose its own regulations and to be able to, some teeth, something that with, so not just advisory, something where they're actually able to do some really good work. So I'd love that. So yeah, so
Okay.
write the people,
All right. Good.
give them a
Let
call.
me.
I know that you two know all those people, so give them a
Well,
well,
call.
and
go ahead,
Cold
Jim.
Red listeners out there, you do the same. Special request from Pamela. That makes perfect sense. Um, it must have been about 20 years ago, and Ray and I are both football fans, and Michael Vick got caught up in something with some dog fighting. Were you?
Hmm.
Did you provide any help in that case, or expert testimony, or assist in that in any way, shape, or form?
I didn't, but some of my colleagues did, and people in the field that I know very well. Rebecca Huss ended up being a special magistrate who was charged, and she's a law professor. She's now with Best Friends Society, which is this huge animal shelter and advocacy organization, and she's their general counsel. But at the time, she was a professor of law, and she was charged with figuring out what should happen to all of the dogs that had been confiscated, and she was able to, I mean, with only a couple of exceptions, she was able to get all of them rehabilitated and rehomed for the most part, and which is nothing short of a miracle considering what they'd been through. So that was not a case that I was directly involved in, but I did have access to some of the photos and to see some of the evidence, and it was horrifying. But a case involving at least the depiction of dogfighting that I was involved in was the U.S. versus Stevens case. I don't know if you remember this. It went to the U.S. Supreme Court in 2010. What had happened, can I tell you a little story? It'll take a few minutes, but
Sure.
it'll
Sure.
be okay. So back when I first started with ALDF as an actual employee, so this was like 96, 97, something like that. I received a tip from somebody about this thing called a crush video. Are you
Ah,
familiar with crush videos?
yes.
Yeah.
They're disgusting, but we brought it up, so either you or me can explain what it is.
I'll start, and if I miss anything important, you can fill it in. So crush videos are intended to appeal to people who have a foot fetish, and it involves showing a scantily clad woman, just her body, not her face, with stilettos or sometimes bare feet. And there is a small animal, but it can be as large as, I mean, sometimes they've used puppies, they've even used like small monkeys, but oftentimes it's mice or other smaller animals that are like duct taped or otherwise secured to the floor. And then they use their stiletto to slowly torture and crush the animal or their bare feet, all the while sort of, you know, saying things in a sexually provocative manner. So it's a very, it's, and so I'd never heard of it. They were telling me about this. And so I wanted to see what was going on. And I was able, if you can believe this, I was able to buy a DVD through the mail from California. I was in Oregon, so across state lines. I put the DVD in. I watched 30 seconds and I could not watch anymore. It was the most horrifying things I've ever seen. So I purchased it in LA, from LA. So I called Don Kochek. Jim, did you ever meet Don Kochek? He was a prosecutor in LA.
Name's familiar, but offhand, I don't recall meeting him.
Yeah, I feel like but anyway, so I called him and I said, hey, Don, we'd worked on some other cases. Can I send you this thing? Tell me what you think. So I sent it down there. He looks at it, he calls me back and he said, I've seen people with their faces shot off. This is the worst thing I've ever seen. It's just that bad. Do not look, do not go there. It's so bad. And he said, the problem is that it was sold here, but I don't have a face. I don't know where it was produced. So from an evidentiary perspective, I don't have anything I can work on in terms of prosecuting. And then he said, but it did cross state lines. And given the nature of the video, I think it qualifies as obscene material. And under federal law, you cannot mail obscene material across state lines. So I called the U.S. Attorney's Office down in LA. And I said, hey, explain what was going on, sent the tape down there, waited, didn't get anything. And so I called them back and I said, hi, it's me again. Did you get the tape? Yes, we did. Did you look at it? No, we didn't. And I'm like, why didn't you look at it? And they said, well, the way you described it, it's going to be an obscenity charge. We never do obscenity charges here at the U.S. Attorney's Office in LA because obscenity is a community standard, and in LA, nothing's obscene. Nothing's obscene. And I said, no. Trust me, if you watch 30 seconds of this, you will see. But no. So that was a dead end. And so at that point, I had started to talk to a lot of colleagues in animal law around the country, and we were thinking, this is bad. So several of my colleagues in DC with different organizations like HSUS and others, they drafted a federal law that criminalized the depiction of animal cruelty and really focused on the crush sites, although the language of the law did not say anything about crush sites. So the law got passed. It was signed into law in 1999. Okay, good. A few years later, there was a man whose last name was Stevens, Robert Stevens, who what he did was he sold videotapes of dogfighting and giving tips to dog fighters about how to train them and, just showing dogfighting and on and on and on. And so dogfighting is illegal in all 50 states, right? So the prosecutors in the jurisdiction in which he lived, which was in the Third Circuit, they decided to charge him with violating this new statute that criminalized the depictions of animal cruelty, since dogfighting is defined as animal cruelty in all 50 states, is against the law in all 50 states. So they brought the case at the district court level. He was convicted of violating that statute. He got 37 months in prison, was sentenced to that, and I think 3 years of probation after that. He appealed it to the Third Circuit. The Third Circuit said, no, I'm overturning the conviction because the language of this statute is really overly broad and it's kind of vague, and it could cover otherwise legal activities. Oh, and by the way, stopping or reducing animal cruelty is not a compelling governmental interest, which I disagree with. And I know the judge that wrote that opinion, Judge Smith, and he's a wonderful man. And he and his wife are very involved in the Humane Society. So he often, when I've seen him, he's like, I'm surprised you still talk to me. I'm like, no, it's okay. But so then it gets overturned, and then it was appealed to the Supreme Court. And at that point, that's when I got more involved. And so I co-wrote an amicus brief to the U.S. Supreme Court on behalf of 45 animal law professors around the country. And what we did in this amicus brief was we said, number one, reducing animal cruelty is a compelling governmental interest. So, don't believe what the Third Circuit said. Number two, one of the reasons this is so important is because of the link between animal abuse and human violence. So we talked about that a lot. And we filed it independently, not on behalf of either party, because we were just talking about these legal issues. So we filed that. And then because I was a member of the U.S. Supreme Court, and with the amicus brief, I was able to go to the oral argument. And it was the first day of Sonia Sotomayor's term. It was her very first day on the bench, was when the oral argument occurred. And it was so interesting. That was when Scalia was still alive, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So it was that bench. And what was really evident was that Scalia in particular is a big hunter. And he said, I'm here in Washington, D.C., where hunting is illegal, but hunting is legal everywhere else. If I watched a hunting video in D.C., because this language is so vague, I could be guilty of violating this federal law.
Hmm.
And pretty much at the end of it all, the court agreed with the Third Circuit, and they said, "Yep, the conviction is overturned. The language is just too broad." The only person who dissented was Alito, interestingly. So, and then within the year, then the legislators went back to work and they passed a new law that focuses specifically on crush sites, and that has since been challenged and it's held steady. It passed constitutional muster. So, so it was a really interesting case, and it was a really interesting issue, and it got a lot of press at the time because it was a First Amendment issue. That's the way. And journalists, I mean, so a lot of amicus briefs came in urging the court to overturn that, to confirm what the Third Circuit had done in overturning the conviction. And sort of the animal cruelty part of it got a little bit lost in all of it. But I'm pleased to say that the good news is that the Supreme Court did not confirm what the Third Circuit has said about whether or not it's a compelling state interest to reduce animal cruelty. So that's still an open question out there. But that was our principal concern. We just didn't want, because that would just close so many avenues right there. If it's like, yeah, we don't care, it's not a compelling state interest. So that was a really interesting case involving some dogfighting, the depictions of dogfighting. And it was also a really interesting lesson in terms of, strategic litigation, right? Should they have brought that type of a case as the first case under that new law, which if you look at the legislative history, all they were talking about were crush sites. And then suddenly here we have dogfighting. So it was a good learning opportunity for everybody. And of course, we did end up with a federal law that was more narrowly drawn and which has survived. And so that's a good thing. But it was an interesting experience.
I had I taught a violent crime course at the master's level.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that we talked about sexual crimes.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things we talked about was fetishes. And there was a show on Sally Jesse Raphael where she talked about fetishes. And one of the fetishes she talked about, or she had someone come on and talk about, was women in silhouettes, those with foot fetishes. And they didn't call it a crush, but they called it a squash fetish. And what they would squash were bugs, mud, things of that nature. But it's not far off from what you're talking about.
Yeah.
It's just kind of right there, and then you can graduate up to what you're talking about with that as well.
Yeah.
But I thought that was kind of, I thought because I show that, and the people that watch it, they just go, "Oh, it's disgusting." Even at that level, imagine what you and some of the other people had to take a look at. You go, "Wow."
Yeah. No, it was bad. Jim, did you ever see a crush site? Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Ray, Ken Lanning,
Yep, I do.
retired profiler. He's still out there. He's an expert in sexual crimes, children, adults, whatever. And he had one of these tapes, and he did it for presentation purposes, and they were very sexualized. The one I saw for like 2 minutes, and I couldn't watch anymore. But the woman's toenails were nicely painted, and a shapely, leg from the knee down, stilettos of some sort, and I was told this went on for 45 minutes. It wasn't just like the little animal was tied down, a very sophisticated with wires around, and just it wasn't just a piece of duct tape. I'm sure the amateurs do it that way, but this had I hate to say it, kind of high production value. And it went on, I was told, for 45 minutes, which I couldn't watch. But and at the very end, it's this woman's foot. And who are these? Well, first of all, who is anyone involved in this? But who are the men producing these things, most likely, and watching these things? Where do they get these women from?
I
that
know.
are willing to put these shoes on. I'm sure it's, here's $50 and your favorite white powder, and get out of here. Um,
Right.
but um, but yeah, it's a sexual fetish, paraphilia.
Hmm.
As long as consenting adults and you're not hurting them or animals, do what you want in the privacy of your bedroom. If a woman wants to crush some guy who likes it, his foot or something, hey, go for it. But it shouldn't be these little animals. And I certainly, that's a
No.
very interesting legal
Listen,
path you took to get where you did with that, Pam.
after this show, I'm going to
Yeah.
have to get therapy, guys. All right.
I
I know
know.
Uh,
I
we
know.
we got
I
to move
know.
on.
uh,
Yeah.
uh,
I,
I'll tell you, Ray. It's like after doing this work for so many years, and of course now because I'm a professor, I don't have to be looking at those images or dealing with that
right.
directly anymore. But I mean, right? I'm just like I when I watch a movie, I want it to be a G-rated rom-com. I don't want any violence. I don't want
I'm
anybody to
there.
be
I'm a
hurt. I just
Hallmark guy.
yeah, just
I'm a
like give me a
Hallmark
good
guy. There you
Hallmark Christmas movie.
go.
That's what I want.
Exactly. Exactly. Well,
It's
here, let
like
me ask you this, Pamela.
yes.
Um, hypothetically,
Mhm.
if animals could talk for a day,
Mm.
what species do you think would have the most interesting things to say?
oh boy.
Honestly, probably dogs because they're so integrated into human society, as are cats, but dogs are even more so. And I think they've had such varying experiences. Some of them are great. And I would be willing to bet that a lot of dogs would say, my owner thinks they're doing a great job, but they're not. They keep, I want to just, my nose is the way I communicate and I get information and just let me sniff for a while. Don't keep yanking I actually think dogs would be really interesting because they'd have such insight into the lives that we lead and how we interact with them. And then beyond that, maybe some very deep sea creature. Because what's going on down
Huh.
there?
Hmm. Ray, how many homicide scenes have we either been in person or certainly, investigated after the fact? And there's a dog that witnessed the whole thing. And if only
Absolutely.
that dog could talk.
Yeah,
Sometimes the dogs are killed too, of course,
yeah.
or tortured or hurt somehow. But
Caesar
yeah, if only those
Milan.
dogs could talk.
Caesar Milan, the dog whisperer. That's all we had to do was call him, but
Oh,
we never did.
you only not have pets, but you watch the
Well,
dog
yeah,
shows
I
too.
think so. I mean,
Okay.
I watch it because I pick up tips how to train my dog, what to do, what not to do.
Well,
That's
I'll tell you, a lot of people right now, and there have been several recent articles, like within the last 6 months or so, that have written about how AI is likely going to crack the code on animal communication.
fun.
And thinking about it from an ethical perspective, is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? On the one hand, it's good because maybe we can learn more about what their needs are. On the other hand, it'll also give us information on how better to exploit them. So, it's a little bit of a double-edged sword, but people in that space, in that domain, seem to think that it's going to happen sooner rather than later, that we'll actually be able to communicate or at least understand what they're saying when they're vocalizing or body language.
Um, Back to, well, I'm not sure we actually touched on media, but about 3 or 4 years ago on Netflix, and I think it's still out there, there was a show called Don't F with Cats.
I
I
did not
heard that.
watch that.
Yeah, I don't think I
did,
watched, but I heard it.
I haven't watched it.
Uh,
Did you
it's
watch it?
actually,
I
yeah,
did.
I did.
I
Yeah.
did.
And I think the title is also F, and you can
Yeah.
figure out what the four-letter word is. But it's actually an interesting, like three-part, maybe four-part series about how someone posted online pictures of someone being cruel to a cat and killing it, and
Mhm.
the internet world went nuts.
Yeah.
And I think they couldn't even get investigators to sign on at first to figure it out. And a lot of it was in the U.S., but it turns out they traced the video back to Canada. And I won't, give too much away, but it was actually a very interesting story. And then the police finally did get involved.
Yeah.
Then another murder of a human occurred by the same cat killer. So if you haven't
Yeah.
watched it, and I think those who travel in
Mhm.
your world, Pamela, would probably be interested in that. And I think the person was eventually, I'm sure, charged for the murder of the human.
Yeah.
But I would hope animal cruelty charges would have been brought against that person too. So I had nothing to do with that show, or I wasn't a technical advisor or anything like that. But if you're into this, into having an interest at all in animal rights, which I think almost everyone does, except the truly sadistic people out there or fetish narrative and driven people. They certainly care about animals in that regard. You have at least one book, and I think you're doing an updated version of it.
Yeah, so I have I co-wrote a legal case book. The first edition was written in 2000, and we're currently working on the seventh edition. And because the field is rapidly changing so quickly, every new edition is like a pretty substantial rewrite because lots of new cases, lots of new issues. So yeah, we're working on that right now. Hopefully, we'll have it to the publisher by January. So that's been occupying some of my time. Yeah.
And I'm sure if lawyers or others want it at Amazon or other places.
Yep, absolutely. It's Animal Law Cases and Materials, and right now you can get the sixth edition, but the seventh edition will be out soon. So, and it'll be all updated. Yeah.
Ray, we had a few guests on, I think maybe season 6, a friend of yours from Delaware. And actually, he was at that conference where we attended together, Pamela, in Delaware.
Yeah, well, there was. It was Mark Tobin.
Yes.
Yeah.
He was the chief of animal control in Delaware. Do you know Mark
Yeah.
Tobin?
Yeah, well, I met him in Delaware, yeah.
Well, I feel very bad about that. Mark is a character. And then there's another girl, Susan Underkoffler.
No,
Right.
She's a professor down at University of Florida.
Oh, nice. Okay.
And she does a lot. She does a lot of traveling overseas. She was on the show a couple years, I can say a couple seasons ago. But
Yeah.
Other than Jim's recommendation about watching the cat show, what advice would you give to someone who is considering a career in animal law or advocacy?
Yeah. I would say, first of all, you don't need to be a lawyer to be involved in this field. There are lots of different ways that you can enter this field as an advocate through law enforcement, through NGOs or nonprofits, through state and federal agencies. There are even, through just your own citizen lobbying activities. If you do want to become a lawyer, then I would say do your research and find a law school that offers an extensive animal law program. There are a few of us now. Ours was the very first. It's still the biggest, but there are a few other law schools that really have lovely programs now. And then once you get into law school, just start talking to those professors because they will introduce you to people in the field. And, those early connections can make such a difference. And I would also say that in the meantime, if it's something that you're passionate about, find a place to volunteer, whether it's a humane society, whether it's a nonprofit, whether it's, just find some place where you can be adding some value. And that can be everything from just taking the dogs for a walk to, I was, reviewing adoption contracts for shelters in my very early days of pro bono work. So it can be lots of different things. And you can always feel free to reach out to me because there's so much work to be done. As you both know, there's so much work to be done, and we need as many talented, smart, dedicated people as we can get in this field. And I'm always happy to talk to anybody who wants to get into this field or who is in the field and wants to get more deeply involved. So I'm easy to find. I'm at Lewis and Clark Law School. If you just Google my name, all the contact information pops up. And I just say that, just, connect with the people in the field. That's going to be one of the best ways for you to find out different pathways.
And if I could add, to go back 25, little over 25 years, the two of us, Pamela, I support 100%, of course, your advocacy role in that regard. But also to law enforcement out there, you see animal cruelty, take it serious. It's not just a young boy rite of passage. Some young girls too. It's not just, oh, he's just being a 12-year-old. No, if it's actually dismembered, and I won't even go any farther than that, but animals really being hurt or killed and mutilated, there is something seriously wrong. And that person has to be put into the system. They may be juveniles at the time, but I'm telling you, 10 years later, if adults start showing up dismembered or dead, or other kids, whatever, you at least want to go and talk to that kid you arrested 10 years before who cut up someone's pet. So from a law enforcement perspective, it people that do bad things to animals almost every time, either currently, in the past, or in the future, are going to do bad things to our fellow humans. And past behavior is the best predictor of future behavior, as we all know. And little kids may start out with animals, then as they get bigger and stronger, they move on to humans. So it's all interconnected here. Of course, you want to save the animals and protect them. But if some crimes happen, you may want to look a little bit further in the environment in which these things occurred, and keep those records intact, because you're going to need them 5 or 10 years later.
You know, when we were doing, I mean, and I think this is still the case with the criminal justice program, but I remember very, very early on when I was doing that work with the Animal Legal Defense Fund, we very quickly saw that, oh my gosh, every time there was a case, there was almost always a kid, or there was like there was a spouse. We routinely started just bringing in child protective services, because we knew if something bad was happening to the animals, something's going on. We would routinely talk to the battered, women's shelters and, some of these other resources. And we would just try to do a community-based approach, because there were potentially multiple victims in that situation.
Let me, in kind of closing out here a little bit, Pamela, if you could change one thing about how society views animals, what would it be?
I would say that just remember that most of the animals that we interact with, or that are part of our lives, whether they're animals in our homes, whether they're animals we eat or wear, or that we see, the birds, in the wildlife, whatever it is, most of the animals that we interact with, they feel pain in a very similar way to humans. They have a central nervous system. And sometimes I think people forget that they are, sentient, to use that word, that they have a life, and that they feel pain. And so maybe stop and think before you engage in behavior, which, if you did that to a child, it would cause them harm. And I think just keeping in mind that animals have feelings too, right? And so they feel that. And anybody who's had a dog, also that dogs can suffer from psychological harm as well. They feel fear, they feel stress, they feel anxiety. Other animals have that as well. So I think just keeping that in mind, taking a nanosecond to remember that, and maybe it'll change your behavior in terms of what you were just about to do. And you might, if a dog is misbehaving, maybe you won't hit the dog. Maybe you'll try some other approach, because you'll keep that in mind. And so that would be something I'd love to see, because I think everybody knows that intellectually. I think most people do, but they don't translate that necessarily in terms of their interaction with an animal. So keeping that present, I think, would make a huge difference.
I agree.
And
Well
I
said.
think that's no better way than to shut out this episode of Cold Red. Pamela Frasch, where friendship goes back over a quarter of a century. I think you were a teenager when I met you.
I was so young.
But you were over 18, just for the record. So anyway, no, we've been friends a long time, and you've done some great work in this in the criminal justice system, certainly for animals, and maybe helping solve crimes of when serial killers are involved and all that stuff, even indirectly. So thank you for coming on this episode of Cold Red. Ray, thank you as always for being here, folks. Please consider liking and subscribing us, following us at coldredpodcast.com, our website. And thanks to our two producers, Matt Robinson, Matt McLaughlin, our music coordinator, Rick Schilling, and everybody. Again, thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode of Cold Red.
Thank you.